I woke to the sound of tires crunching gravel outside my home, a sound that shouldn't have been there. My heart sank. 3 days early from a grueling out-of-state construction job, I expected peace, quiet. But instead I stepped to my window and froze. My empty lot, the land I'd bought for my cousin's future home, had been transformed. Rows of white folding chairs gleamed under a canopy of string lights. A stage stood proudly in the center. Giant floral arches lined a red carpet walkway, and the smell of fresh-cut flowers mixed with the faint sound of laughter carried on the wind. This was no innocent neighborhood gathering. This was a wedding venue, on my property. I felt my stomach twist. I wasn't even part of the HOA, and yet here was their notorious leader, Karen, somehow using my absence as an invitation. It didn't take long to find out who was behind this madness. A quick word with a neighbor confirmed it. Karen's daughter, Karen Jr., was getting married, and apparently my land was their gift to themselves. 210 invitations had been sent. Tables, decorations, a stage. Everything had been delivered days ago. My name hadn't been asked. My permission hadn't been sought, and I was expected to be gone long enough for it all to happen without me noticing. The next morning, I didn't have to look for them. They came to me. Karen, the bride, the groom, and a swarm of vendors marched around my property like they owned it. I walked toward them, my pulse steady, but my patience fraying. "What exactly is going on here?" I asked. Karen didn't even look guilty. "Excuse me," she said with the authority of someone who thought she ran the world. "This is a private wedding setup." I smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Private?" "Yes. Mine. My property. So maybe you can explain what made you think you could host a wedding here?" Karen Jr. rolled her eyes. "You're not even supposed to be here." I stared at her, stunned by the audacity. "So you didn't ask. You don't have a permit. And you think I should just—" "What? Let this happen?" Karen's voice went syrupy sweet. "It's just one day. You're being selfish, having an empty lot and not letting your neighbors use it. A wedding is a beautiful thing. You could even come have some cake." I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I kept my voice low. "You have 24 hours to get everything off my property, or I will." And then I walked away, because if I stayed another second, I might have said something I'd regret. The next morning, I stepped to the window half hoping, half doubting. My doubt won. Every chair, every ribbon, every smug little sign pointing toward happily ever after still sat there. They weren't going to move a thing. By noon, I'd spent hours hunched over my desk, combing through legal articles, property, laws, trespassing clauses. This wasn't my strength. I worked with my hands, not paperwork. But I needed to be sure I could do what I was thinking without ending up in handcuffs. When I was satisfied, I picked up my phone and started calling my crew. It was 4 a.m. on the morning of the wedding when the first truck pulled up, headlights sweeping across the grass. My guys climbed out, tools slung over their shoulders, grinning like they'd just been handed the best prank of their lives. "Let's make this quick," I told them. And we did. Chairs were folded and stacked in minutes. Tables loaded into the truck. The stage, bolted into the ground, came up under the teeth of my backhoe and clattered to the side. And then, for good measure, I dug. Deep, uneven trenches where the aisle had been, the beginnings of a house foundation. By the time the sun rose, my lot looked like a construction site. Because technically it was. At 7, the first guests began arriving. Cars slowed, windows rolled down, faces stared in confusion. Then Karen appeared, horror etched across her face. "What have you done?" she shrieked. She stormed toward me, hands flailing. 210 people RSVP'd. You ruined the wedding." I leaned against the backhoe and folded my arms. "I warned you. You didn't listen." Her Voice rose to a pitch that made nearby guests wince. You're going to accommodate them, now. No, I said simply. Her face contorted. She pulled out her phone, jabbing at the screen. Fine, I'll have the police here in 10 minutes. And she did. Blue and red lights flashed and 2 officers stepped out. Karen met them halfway, spilling a flood of accusations. Destruction. Of property, thousands of dollars lost, a ruined day. The officers turned to me. I was calm, almost amused. I showed them the deed to the property, the permit for construction, the photos I'd taken of the wedding setup the day before. I explained, plainly, that she had no legal right to be there, and that I'd given her a clear deadline to remove her belongings. They nodded. This is a civil matter, one officer told her. We can't force him to host your event. Karen's eyes narrowed like she could burn holes in me. I'll sue you, she spat. For the flowers, the caterer, the hairstylist, everything. I shrugged. Go ahead, and I'll counter for trespassing and cleanup costs. She didn't reply. She didn't have to. The way her lips trembled told me she'd already lost. Guests trickled away, some muttering under their breath, some throwing sympathetic glances my way. I felt bad for them. They'd dressed up for a celebration, not to watch a screaming match in a torn-up field. But I didn't feel bad enough to undo what I'd done. In the days after, Karen tried everything she could to smear my name. She pushed the HOA to send me violation notices for weekend construction. I sent back proof I wasn't a member. She accused me of digging without a permit. I sent her a copy of mine, stamped and signed. Eventually, she fell silent. But silence doesn't erase a story. People talk. Neighbors who'd once only waved from their driveways now stopped to chat, leaning in close to ask, was it true? Did you really tear it all down? I'd smile. Every last chair. And deep down I knew something else. She'd never forget it. Everyone thought it was over after the wedding day, that Karen would slink back into her corner, licking her wounds in silence. But people like her don't retreat. They regroup, they calculate, and they wait for another opportunity to dig. Their claws in. It started small, a folded paper stuffed into my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Notice of violation was printed in bold across the top. Below, in shaky legalese, it claimed I'd broken community harmony bylaws by engaging in destructive conduct on a weekend. I laughed out loud. There were 2 problems with that. 1, I wasn't part of the HOA. 2, even if I had been, there was no such bylaw in existence. The second notice came 3 days later, taped right to my front door. This time it claimed I was disturbing the peace with construction, noise. My crew had only been by once that week for less than an hour to drop off a load of lumber for my cousin's future house. No saws, no drills, just a truck backing in. The only noise was Karen's fury. The third was a thinly veiled threat, a printed letter warning that repeat violations could result in property liens and legal action. I could almost hear her voice as I read it, dripping with smug satisfaction, imagining me panicking over her empty threats. But the thing about me? I don't rattle easy. I've spent my life on construction sites, facing down city inspectors, insurance reps, and the occasional drunk neighbor who thought my bulldozer was too loud. I know when someone has power, and when they're bluffing. I didn't respond to a single one of her notices. Not with a call, not with an email, nothing. I wanted her to stew in her own frustration, wondering why I wasn't taking the bait. The neighborhood, however, had other plans. People were still talking about the wedding debacle. At the hardware store, an old guy from down the road leaned on his cart and grinned. "Heard you pulled the plug on the great Karen wedding," he said. "Wish I'd been there to see her face." At the coffee shop, a young mom with a stroller stopped me. "You're the guy who saved his property from the HOA, right?" I nodded, and she whispered, "Good for you." She's been a nightmare since the day she moved in. Not everyone was on my side, though. I caught a few neighbors giving me cold stares like I'd been the villain in this story. I imagined the version Karen had told them, the selfish loner who destroyed a wedding for no reason. And I knew that if I didn't handle this smartly, that version might stick in their minds. One afternoon, while I was working on my truck in the driveway, I heard the crunch of heels on gravel. Karen herself was walking toward me, a manila envelope in her hand. "You've ignored all my notices," she said flatly. I didn't look up from the engine. "That's because I'm not in your HOA." "You live in this neighborhood," she shot back. "You can't just do whatever you want." I straightened up, wiping grease from my hands. "You mean like hosting a 210-person wedding on land you don't own?" Her jaw tightened. "That was a misunderstanding." "No," I said, leaning against the hood. "That was trespassing." Her face flushed, but she didn't back down. "You're going to regret making an enemy out of me." I chuckled softly. "Karen, I work with steel and concrete all day. I don't scare easy." She shoved the envelope toward me. "You've been warned." I didn't take it. I let it drop onto the driveway between us. She glared at me for a long moment, then turned sharply and walked away. That night, I opened the envelope just out of curiosity. Inside was a printout from some online forum about HOA rights and responsibilities, highlighted in random spots that made no legal sense. There was also a single handwritten note at the bottom. "We will make you comply." It would have been laughable if it wasn't so obsessive. She wasn't letting this go. That was when I decided to make a move of my own. Not revenge, not yet, but insurance. I dug out my property deed, my permits, and every scrap of paper proving I had zero legal ties to the HOA. I made multiple copies and stored them in a fireproof safe. Then I started talking, quietly, carefully, to the neighbors who'd been watching all of this unfold. "Just so you know," I'd say, "I'm not part of the HOA, never have been. And if anyone tells you different, they're lying." Some nodded knowingly. Others seemed surprised. A few I could tell didn't. Believe me, not yet. But seeds had been planted. By the end of that week, Karen's notices stopped arriving. The silence was almost unnerving. It felt less like a victory and more like the pause before the next storm. I didn't have to wait long to find out I was right. The quiet lasted barely 2 weeks. Then, like clockwork, I caught the first sign that Karen was moving her game to a new level. It was a Saturday morning, just after sunrise. I stepped outside with my coffee and noticed a couple I'd never seen, before standing on the edge of my lot. They were dressed like real estate agents, the man in a sharp blazer, the woman clutching a clipboard. They were pointing at the ground, talking in hushed voices, as if they were surveying land for sale. I walked toward them. "Can I help you?" The woman looked startled, almost guilty. "Oh, hi, we're with the HOA Land Committee. We're just reviewing community property for potential improvements." I stared at her. "This isn't community property. This is my land." They exchanged a quick glance. "Well," the man began, "we were told this lot might be available for—" "By who?" I interrupted. His mouth shut so fast I heard his teeth click. They mumbled something about having to confirm the details, and left in a hurry. That night, I couldn't shake the thought. Karen was trying something bigger than petty notices. Maybe she was spreading rumors that I'd defaulted on my taxes, or that my cousin wasn't moving in after all. Whatever it was, she was planting seeds, hoping they'd grow into leverage. 2 days later, I got my answer. Another letter, but this one wasn't hand-delivered. It came certified mail, stamped with the HOA's official seal. Notice of acquisition interest. It read, in bizarre legal jargon, it claimed that because my empty lot was unused and neglected, the HOA had a right of interest to purchase or repurpose it for community benefit. It wasn't a formal claim, but it was meant to scare me, or at least make me believe they could force me to sell. I almost laughed. Almost. But the thing is, intimidation only works if you keep your head down. And I'd been playing defense long enough. That week, I called my cousin. "You ready to build yet?" He hesitated. "I thought you said it wasn't urgent." It wasn't. Now it is. 3 days later, we had a full site plan drawn up. I called in favors from suppliers I'd known for years. By the weekend, trucks were rolling in with materials, lumber, rebar, concrete forms. My lot became a hive of activity. The sound of saws and hammers rang out from dawn to dusk. By Monday morning, Karen was back. She marched across the street, phone in hand, already recording. "You can't do this!" she shouted over the whine of a power saw. I turned toward her. "Do what? This is community land until the HOA. Until the HOA what?" I stepped closer. "Karen, you don't own this dirt. You don't control it. And if you step foot past that property line, you'll be trespassing again." Her cheeks flushed crimson. "You think you're clever, but everyone in this neighborhood will side with me." I smiled faintly. "We'll see." She stormed off, muttering into her phone, no doubt narrating her version of events for the HOA board. By noon, I had my answer. Another certified letter arrived, this time accusing me of unauthorized commercial activity and disturbance of residential peace. They cited imaginary bylaws about weekend work restrictions and community project approval. I sent back one page, a copy of my building permit, signed by the county inspector, with 3 words scrawled in pen at the bottom. Not in HOA. It was like lighting a match in dry grass. The whispers started almost immediately. At the diner, "I overheard 2 men at the counter. Karen says he's building without permission," one murmured. "Permission from who?" The other snorted. "He's not in their club." At the hardware store, the cashier leaned in as she rang up my purchase. "She's telling people you're breaking the law. Folks are starting to ask questions." Good, I thought. Let them ask. Let the truth crawl its way into every corner of this neighborhood until no one could pretend Karen's narrative was the only one. But Karen wasn't done. The following week, I found a stack of flyers shoved into my mailbox. They were cheap. Copies, each one a black and white photo of my lot mid-construction, captioned in bold, "Is this what you want in our neighborhood?" Below was a paragraph dripping with venom about outsiders who refuse to respect community values and property misuse that affects everyone's quality of life. I stood in my driveway holding one of the flyers, the paper trembling slightly, in my grip. Not from fear, from something sharper. Karen wanted a war, and she'd just made it public. By the time the flyers hit every doorstep, the battle lines were drawn. You could feel it in the air, a quiet, uncomfortable tension that settled over the neighborhood like a storm cloud that refused to break. Some neighbors nodded at me when I passed. Others looked away as if afraid to be seen taking sides. Karen, of course, basked in the attention. She walked the streets like a campaigning politician, stopping to talk to anyone who'd listen. I could imagine her words. "He's dangerous for our community. He doesn't respect rules. He's turning this place into a construction zone." The truth was simpler. She hated losing control. And the wedding fiasco had been the first time someone had stood in her way publicly. Now, she wanted revenge in the form of humiliation. But if she thought public pressure would make me fold, she didn't understand me at all. One afternoon, as I was unloading a shipment of drywall from the back of my truck, a neighbor named Bill wandered over. Bill was a quiet guy in his late 60s, retired Navy. We'd barely exchanged more than a hello in the past. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure," I said, setting down the panel I was carrying. He glanced around before speaking, lowering his voice. "I don't like what she's doing to you. I've lived here 20 years. She's run off 3 families already just by making life miserable for them. You're the first one who's stood your ground. I studied him for a moment. "Why are you telling me this now?" He shrugged. "Because you should know you've got allies. More than you think." It was the first time I realized this wasn't just about me. Karen's reign had been a slow, suffocating chokehold on the entire community. Maybe they didn't have the fight in them to push back, but I did. And if I played this right, maybe my fight could loosen her grip for good. The next morning, I took my coffee and sat on the tailgate of my truck, letting the hum of construction fill the air. Across the street, Karen emerged from her house, perfectly coiffed, clipboard in hand. She spotted me and crossed immediately, her heels clicking like gunfire on the pavement. "You've escalated this beyond reason," she said without preamble. I smiled. "Morning to you, too." Her nostrils flared. "This neighborhood is about peace and order. You've turned it into a spectacle." I leaned forward slightly. "Karen, let me explain something. I build things for a living. Houses, schools, roads. And when I start a project, I finish it. No amount of noise from the sidelines changes that." She jabbed a finger toward me. "You think you can hide behind your paperwork, but people see what you're doing. They don't like it." I let the silence hang for a moment. "You're right," I said finally. "Some people don't like it, but they also remember you used my property for a wedding without asking. They remember the police showing up. They remember who trespassed and who didn't." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She turned sharply and walked away, but not before I caught the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. That flicker was all I needed. 2 days later, I hosted what I called a construction open house. I set up a canopy on my lot, put out coolers of bottled water, and laid the blueprints for my cousin's house on a folding table. I invited every neighbor, even the ones I knew were loyal to Karen. "Come see what I'm building," I said. "Ask questions, voice concerns. This is your chance." They came, cautiously at first, then in larger numbers. Some were curious. Others just wanted to see if the rumors were true. I walked them through the plans, showed them the permits, explained the timeline. I answered every question honestly, even the ones that dripped with skepticism. By the end of the day, something had shifted. People saw I wasn't hiding anything, that I wasn't the villain Karen had painted me to be. And maybe, just maybe, they started to see through her. Karen didn't show up, of course, but I knew she'd heard about it. That night I found another envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 4 words scrawled in black marker. "You won't win this." I stared at it for a long moment, then set it down on the counter. She wanted me rattled. She wanted me to lose sleep. Instead, I slept better than I had in weeks, because the more desperate Karen became, the more obvious it was to everyone else that she was losing control, and I had no intention of stopping. The next wave didn't come with flyers or warnings. It came in the form of an official-looking envelope stamped with the county seal. Inside was a notice from the zoning department claiming they'd received multiple complaints about my construction project, everything from noise violations to possible environmental impact. The letter stated they were sending an inspector to evaluate compliance. I didn't need to guess who filed those complaints. Karen had finally figured out that if she couldn't get me through HOA pressure, she'd try to weaponize the local government. And while most of her threats had been laughable so far, this one could actually slow me down. The morning of the inspection, I made sure I was ready. Permits, printed and in a binder. Lot boundaries, clearly marked with stakes and bright orange ribbon. Noise ordinance times? I'd been careful to start no earlier than 8 a.m. and finish by 6 p.m. sharp. The inspector, a stocky guy in a county windbreaker, stepped out of his truck looking like he expected trouble. "Got a few complaints about this site," he said, flipping open his clipboard. I smiled. "Bet I can guess from who." He smirked like he'd heard it before. "Let's just take a look." We walked the property. He measured setbacks, checked the permits, glanced at the materials. Every time he tried to find something off, I had the documentation ready. 10 minutes in, his tone had shifted from skeptical to mildly impressed. "Honestly," he said, "this is one of the cleaner job sites I've seen." "Appreciate that," I replied. "I run a tight ship. When he left, I knew Karen wouldn't get the result she wanted. But she'd just learned something dangerous, that she could make my life harder even if she couldn't win outright. And sure enough, within the month, 3 more random inspections showed up. Code enforcement, stormwater runoff, even fire safety. Each time I passed without issue, but each time it cost me time and energy. She was playing the long game. Then came the day she overplayed her hand. It was a Thursday afternoon when a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. "We got a report about illegal dumping on your property," he said. I blinked. "Dumping what?" He gestured toward the empty lot. "Household trash, bags of it." We walked over, and sure enough, there were 8 or 9 black garbage bags piled against my construction fence. Someone had torn a hole in one, and coffee grounds and paper plates spilled onto the grass. I didn't even have to open the bags to know what had happened. Karen had staged it, hoping to create a violation that could stick. "Mind if I look inside?" the deputy asked. "Go ahead," I said. 2 bags in, he found a piece of mail, addressed to Karen. We both stared at it. His eyebrows rose. "Well, that's something." He jotted down a note. "You want to press charges for illegal dumping?" I thought about it. "Not yet, but please document everything." He nodded, took photos, and left. I didn't call Karen. I didn't confront her. I wanted her wondering what I'd do with that evidence. A few days later, I got my answer. Karen showed up at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed. "You've been spreading lies about me," she accused. I stayed calm. "I haven't said a word, but you should know the sheriff documented those trash bags." Her face went pale. "You can't prove I don't have to," I said. "The deputy's report says your name and address were inside. If I file, it's his problem now." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Without another word, she turned and walked away. That night, for the first time in months, my phone was silent. No anonymous calls, no petty letters, no fake violations. It was the quiet before the storm, because when someone like Karen feels cornered, they don't back down. They come out swinging, and I had the feeling her next move would make the wedding fiasco look like child's play. It was early on a Monday when the storm finally broke. I'd just finished my first cup of coffee when my phone buzzed with a call from my cousin. "You see the HOA newsletter yet?" he asked, his voice tight. "No," I said. "Why?" "You better sit down." I didn't need to, because 5 minutes later I was standing in my driveway staring at a fresh copy of the newsletter that someone had shoved into my mailbox. There, on the front page, was my name in bold letters. The headline read, "Non-member resident engaged in unauthorized dangerous construction." Beneath it was a full article, complete with cherry-picked photos of my lot, taken at angles that made it look messy and unsafe, and paragraphs of accusations. According to the piece, I was violating multiple community safety ordinances, creating hazards for children, and lowering property values. Every word was a lie, and every neighbor would see it. It wasn't just an attack. It was character assassination in print, with my name plastered on it like a criminal's mugshot. For a few minutes, I just stood there, letting the anger burn, slow and deep. Then I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. She listened quietly as I read the article word for word. "That's defamation," she said without hesitation. "And if you can prove they published it with malicious intent, which, given your history with Karen, won't be hard, you've got a case." We spent the rest of the morning gathering evidence. Every threatening letter, every fake violation, the garbage bag stunt, the flyers, all of it went into a neatly organized folder. By the end of the week, a cease and desist letter was on its way to the HOA's board. I sent a copy to Karen's personal address, too, just to make sure she saw it before the rest of them did. Her response came 2 days later, not in words, but in action. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I pulled up from running errands and saw a tow truck parked in front of my property. My work trailer, loaded with tools worth more than most cars, was hitched to the back. I slammed the truck into park and jumped out. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I barked at the driver. He looked uncomfortable. "Got a call from the HOA. Said this trailer was illegally parked on community land." "This is my land," I snapped. "Unhook it, now." Karen was standing on the sidewalk, phone in hand, filming the whole thing. "We have a right to remove unauthorized equipment," she said sweetly. "You have no right," I shot back. "And you just attempted to steal thousands of dollars worth of my property, on video." Her smile faltered for the briefest second. The tow truck driver glanced between us, then slowly lowered the trailer back onto my lot. "Sorry, man," he muttered before climbing into his cab and driving off. Karen kept filming, but I could see the nerves in her eyes now. She'd gone too far. That night, my lawyer filed a police report for attempted theft and harassment. It wasn't just a bluff this time. It was the start of a legal record that couldn't be spun away with gossip. The next morning, something unexpected happened. I was out front tightening a tarp over some lumber when Bill, the retired Navy neighbor, walked over. Behind him were 2 other neighbors I barely knew, a couple in their 50s who lived 3 houses down. "We're done with her," Bill said simply. The woman nodded. "She's been pushing people around for years, but going after your tools? That's too far. We're calling for a vote to remove her as president." I didn't smile. Not yet. I'd seen how slippery Karen could be. But for the first time since this all started, the tide felt like it might actually be turning. Still, I knew she wouldn't go quietly. She'd fight until the last inch of ground was gone beneath her feet, and I had no intention of giving her any. The removal vote was set for a Thursday evening in the community center, a beige brick building that had hosted everything from bake sales to budget meetings. But on that night, it felt more like a courtroom. I arrived early, not because I was part of the HOA, I still wasn't and never would be, but because word had spread that Karen planned to use the meeting to set the record straight about me before the vote. By the time I walked in, every plastic chair was filled. Neighbors stood against the walls, murmuring to each other in low voices. At the front of the room, Karen sat behind a folding table, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. When the meeting started, Karen wasted no time. She stood, holding a thick stack of papers. "Before we begin tonight's business," she said, "I'd like to address the slander and harassment I've endured these past months." I leaned back in my chair, watching her work the room. She was good. I had to give her that. She spoke with practiced pauses, letting her words settle like dust. She painted herself as a victim of my aggression, my disrespect for community standards, and my dangerous disregard for safety. Several people nodded along. Others glanced at me, gauging my reaction. I gave them nothing. Then she made her mistake. "And as evidence," she continued, "I have here photos of hazardous conditions at his so-called construction site, taken just last week." She held them up, grainy, zoomed-in shots that made my lot look like a scrapyard. But there was a problem. In the background of one photo, you could clearly see my cousin's truck, a truck that hadn't been there for over a month. I stood. "Madam President, may I speak?" The room fell silent. Karen hesitated. "You're not a member." "No, but my name's been in your newsletter, your flyers, and now your presentation. Fair's fair." A few voices in the crowd muttered agreement. She gave a stiff nod. I walked to the front, holding a folder in one hand. Those photos you just showed? Taken weeks ago, not last week. And you knew that. Which means you're standing here lying to your neighbors to protect your own position. I opened the folder and laid out my own stack of papers. My permits, the inspector's clean reports, the police documentation from the trash dumping incident, and finally, a copy of the sheriff's attempted theft report with her name in it. Gasps rippled through the room. Everything I've done on my property is legal, I said evenly. Everything you've done to interfere has been harassment, and now you're facing removal because you've done the same to others in this room. For years. For a moment, no one moved. Then Bill's voice cut through the silence. Let's vote. The board members exchanged a look, then passed out slips of paper. People scribbled quickly, some with shaking hands. Karen sat stiffly, her jaw tight, eyes fixed on the floor. When the votes were counted, the head of the board cleared his throat. By majority decision, Karen is removed as president of the HOA, effective immediately. The room erupted. Some clapped. Others just exhaled, like they'd been holding their breath for years. Karen stood, her face drained of color, and gathered her papers without a word. She walked out, heels clicking, the door slamming behind her. But I knew it wasn't over. People like Karen don't disappear. They retreat and plot. And sure enough, 2 days later, I saw her walking the street, stopping to whisper to certain neighbors. She wasn't president anymore, but she still had influence. She could still stir up trouble. And I had a strong feeling she had one last move in her before this ended. I just didn't know yet how far she'd go. It happened on a Sunday morning, the kind where the air was still and the neighborhood felt almost too quiet. I was halfway through sanding a door frame for my cousin's new house when I heard a sound that made every nerve in my body tense. The growl of an engine rolling onto my lot. I stepped outside to see a delivery truck backing up toward my property. The driver hopped out with a clipboard. Got an order here, he said. 20 tables, 200 chairs, dance floor, catering tents. I blinked. You've got the wrong address. He glanced at the paperwork. Address matches. Payment. Cleared. Delivery instructions say to set up here. And there it was, Karen's last move. She was trying to turn my property into another event venue, maybe thinking I'd be out for the day and she could stage some community gathering to make me look bad when I shut it down. I smiled slowly. Go ahead and unload, I told the driver. He looked surprised but shrugged and got to work. I didn't touch a single chair, didn't move a single table. I just called the county sheriff's office and explained exactly what was happening. By the time the last tent pole was in the ground, 2 patrol cars rolled up. The deputies stepped out, taking in the setup. You called this in? One asked. Yep, I said, handing him the paperwork the driver had given me. Delivery was paid for with someone else's card, and this is my private property. I didn't order it. The deputy's eyes narrowed. You have any idea who did? Oh, I said, I have a pretty good idea. As if on cue, Karen appeared, striding down the sidewalk in a bright summer dress, her phone held up like she was recording her own triumph. Officers, she called. This is a community event, and he's refusing to cooperate. One deputy held up a hand. Ma'am, did you arrange and pay for this setup? Karen hesitated, then lifted her chin. Yes. As acting organizer for the HOA's welcome celebration, you're not the HOA president anymore. The deputy cut in. And this is private property, which means you just admitted to unauthorized use and possible trespass. Her smile faltered. This is for the good of the neighborhood. The other deputy spoke up. That's not how the law works. We'll need you to come with us and answer some questions about this delivery and how it was paid for. The color drained from her face. You can't, but they could. And they did. The deputies escorted her to the patrol car while neighbors began to gather, drawn by the flashing lights. I caught sight of Bill standing on his porch, arms crossed, a faint smirk on his face. Karen didn't look at me as she was driven away, but I knew she could feel every pair of eyes on her. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was her downfall, in public, in broad daylight. Over the next week, the rumor mill churned. Word spread that she was facing charges for fraud and trespassing. The new HOA president issued a statement, distancing the board from her actions, calling them unauthorized and inappropriate. Even her staunchest supporters stopped defending her. For the first time in months, my lot was quiet. No flyers, no letters, no surprise inspections. Just the sound of hammers and saws, the smell of fresh lumber, and the slow, satisfying progress of a house being built. One evening, as the sun dipped low, my cousin stood beside me looking over the framing. "You know," he said, "most people would have just put up a fence and been done with it." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. Most people don't let a bully think they've won. The neighborhood still talked about the wedding fiasco. Now they had another story. The day Karen finally pushed too far and lost everything. And I had something better than revenge. I had my property, my peace, and the knowledge that sometimes the best way to win isn't to fight harder. It's to let your opponent destroy themselves. You've heard this confession. Now wait until you hear the next one.